and I'm really glad to be able to introduce him tonight. My experience getting a master's degree here has been tremendous, and studying with Ted has been tremendous, but also painful, because I've had lots of preconceptions neutralized. When I started studying with Ted, I thought I knew what the mind-body connection was. I had that neutralized. I thought I knew something about the connection between behavior and health, and I had that preconception figuratively body slammed. Finally, on just a very practical level, I could not believe that there was somehow a connection between mindfulness and my lower back pain. And my mind was opened, and I think it's rare, and I feel grateful that in getting a master's degree here, I've got to have such a practically edifying experience. A little bit about Ted's work. He's written several books, most of them having to do with the subject of how the human mind and body operate as a psychophysical whole in action. He's a professor here at Teachers College. He teaches 2 classes, one in the spring about the subject matter of his first book, The Undivided Self, and another in the summer about mindfulness in action. And finally, Ted Dimon founded an institute that teaches people how to put into action the 30 years of grounded theory that he's amassed. It's with great pleasure that tonight I introduce my esteemed professor, Dr. Theodore Dimon.
Good evening. I'm sitting at a piano. I'm sitting at my piano. The year is 1981. I'm 25 years old. I've spent 5 years, trying to figure out how to be aware of my body in action. I pretty much figured out how to bring about a more relaxed state of that system, but I can't maintain it when I engage in an activity. I'm finally at the point that when I actually go to raise my hand to strike a key, I can see what happens that's normally unconscious at a more conscious level, and I see the possibility of understanding the field or the subject of how the human organism operates in action at a conscious level. So, how many of you have had the experience where you sit down at a desk to work, you're rested, you feel pretty good, you've had a cup of coffee, and after a few minutes your back hurts, you're slumping, you're uncomfortable, or some other symptom arises? That simple, mundane experience masks a profound problem. We see it when that happens as physical, because we only experience the physical symptom. We don't experience the complex neurology that's going on. But as I learned at the piano, when that happens, there's actually a complex mental and physical process happening. And my interest for the last 35 years has been in understanding that, and today I want to present a model about it. In a very general way, there are 2 approaches to the problem of conscious development, what I call the top-down and bottom-up. The top-down are methods that have been developed by individuals who have accessed or claim to have accessed higher states of consciousness. These usually come to us in the form of traditions, and we know it as meditation. The second general approach is what I call the bottom-up, and this is the scientific approach we associate with the Western world, which is based usually on an understanding of biological systems like the muscle system or the autonomic nervous system, and usually involves methods for affecting health through trying to alter the working of those systems. They're both very subtle in their own way. They're both very necessary in their own way. But they're both missing something. The top-down models, in general, have a very sophisticated view of consciousness, but they're really not that comfortable with the body, and they're not that comfortable with the science, sometimes even going so far as to repudiate the science and the biology. The bottom-up models are very sophisticated in their understanding of bodily systems, but they're not very comfortable with consciousness, and even sometimes go so far as to repudiate consciousness. But consciousness is the single most important part of the whole equation. Certainly if you want a conscious model, it is. And what I'm going to suggest is that if you understand the two things in activity and how they work as an active biological and conscious system, that it's possible to arrive at a new understanding of conscious development. So even as you sit here, you could, well, you're generally aware of what's going on around you. You say, well, I'm aware of the people in the room. I'm aware of this person speaking. I might be socially aware of people who've come in and out. Why would I need to be attentive? I mean, I'm already attentive. Well, the answer is not really. We're attentive to the things that we do. We've evolved to become selectively highly attuned to specific things that we want to focus on. When we do that, we tend not to be very aware of ourselves. So we've all had the experience where we sit down to work at the computer, we start getting involved in what we're doing, and an hour goes by, and the music in the background is completely gone. We haven't heard it for an hour. The people moving around us in the room, we forgot about that. We've basically lost touch with what's going on around. In a certain way, we've become pretty unconscious, and yet you wouldn't say that our behavior is not voluntary and not conscious. Of course we are conscious, and of course we're engaging, if we're at the computer, in a very complex voluntary activity. But we haven't evolved yet to the point that that activity involves an awareness of ourselves while we're able to selectively attend to what we're doing. That's a much more difficult proposition. To arrive at that kind of knowledge, we have to understand two things. First, we have to understand something about how to be kinesthetically aware of this system in action. And that, in turn, that ability to be kinesthetically aware, in turn, requires that we study how it works, that we understand actually how it's designed. Secondly, we have to see how that operates in activity in such a way that when we improve how that system works, as I did at the piano, we then see what happens at an unconscious level when I engage in activity. Because when you engage in activity, it's so complex that a lot of what goes on is happening at an unconscious level. Arriving at that kind of knowledge, however, does not come out of descriptive science. Descriptive science, important and critical as it is, cannot give us the knowledge we need about that system and how it works in action, because the way that system works in action requires an experiential study of the whole system as a whole in activity. And that's a kind of a different, I don't think that's unscientific, I think it yields a different kind of scientific knowledge. As a model, that makes it possible to then bring about a change in our own awareness of what we're doing so that we could become conscious in action in a way that we weren't before. So I want to just show you two slides. To see the system in action, the first thing we have to do is recognize that it's not just a mind and a body, because there really is no, I don't know what that means. I mean, unless you've broken your foot and the doctor's repairing it, which I think is fair to say is a body problem, unless that's happened, we really don't have a mind and body. We really only have mental functions that operate as a unity with motor functions. I just put a few here. Thinking, as in cognition, even when you're thinking, you're using your body. Otherwise, why is your back hurting while you're thinking? Intentionality, as in having ideas to do something. When you have the idea of doing something, well, which we're having all the time, like I am now speaking, it's linked with your motor system. Perception's another one. You don't just perceive things, you perceive things for a reason, and because you're involved and engaged in the world. So we really have to first have a unified concept and study that in action. And when that happens, we then, this goes to the second slide, when that happens, we then can begin to see the unconscious versus the conscious working of the self. I say the self because it's a useful philosophical term to avoid talking about one or another part, but it's a way of putting them together. And in the model that I'm presenting, the areas to which we have to look to understand this further are child development, skill, health, and mindful action, or being more aware in action. So in the book I've written, which you see here, this is sort of an advanced publication, by the way. That means it's self-published, self-printed. And it's short and sweet, but there are 4 chapters, and there's a chapter on each of these topics. But even as short as it is, I can't cover all of them. I want to touch on 2 of them today. I want to talk just a bit about child development and a bit on health, okay? I don't know why, but I think those are 2 that are important to look at for now. So a child that's engaged in an activity, any activity, is employing a mechanism, its own organism, of incredible complexity and sophistication. Here's a child. We've had debates about how old this child is, but we think maybe 3.5. Here's a child whose system is working quite beautifully at this age. This little boy painting. When we see that system, of course, because we divide mind and body, we see that system as a physical system, and we say, well, that's just posture. That's not just posture. That's an incredibly complex proprioceptive system that child has to employ in order to paint that painting. It's very rare to see a child by the age of 5 or 6 who enjoys that level of sophistication and accuracy and fluidity in the use of its motor system. By 5 or 6, that's lost. That's why I'm interested, particularly in that age. That system, in turn, is highly related to behavior because, of course, the only reason the child has that system is in order to do things and to think and be engaged in activities. It's highly unusual to see a child at the age of 5 or 6 who isn't starting to disturb the behavioral aspect of that system. And finally, that system is linked with attention in such a way that you really can't separate them. And I want to show you another clip here. This is a very quick clip, so see if you can catch it here, of an infant who is showing the very intimate link between attention and motor function at an age where they haven't separated at all. Watch this little clip here. Here's an infant, not even, able to walk, crawling. What happened is he spotted a dog. He was interested in going to the dog. And the moment he was interested, no sooner had he seen it than the act was in process. Because at that age, a child is not able to separate between its interest in an object and its act in response to the object. This is an area I'm interested in studying here at Teachers College. But even in that 3.5-year-old, or in kids who are a little bit older, you can never separate the active attention from the working of the motor system. 2 examples: a child that's overly focused on doing something, and is at the same time the motor system is imbalanced. You can't separate the working of the motor system from the fixation of attention. And same thing with a child in school who starts to slump and become disengaged, and their attention also becomes scattered. The attention and the motor system are linked. So here we have a clip just showing a few of the areas in this model that pertain to child development. Oh, sorry. The three areas together, in this child, you could see the motor function, the behavioral function, and the attention function all working in a perfectly this child's, now we're talking about a child's a little bit older, he's lucky, this child, working perfectly. Why? Because his motor system, you could see it from the beautiful working of the limbs, the natural upright poise, the gentle, effortless use of the hand, and even this left hand, which is doing nothing, is doing something. It's just very, very nicely sitting there on the table. His motor system is still intact. At the same time, he's working in a balanced way. He's not rushing, he's not out of control. Most adults, I'm sorry to say, are not able to do this. And his attention level is actively engaged, but neither distracted nor overly fixated or preoccupied. He is a psychophysically healthy and balanced child. Psychophysical health. What is psychophysical health? We have models of physical health, but they're usually, in the Western world, pretty negative. In other words, an absence of clinical markers makes us healthy. You know, my blood pressure is good, muscle tone is good, I exercise, my weight is okay, I'm deemed to be healthy. It doesn't really capture this. We have models of emotional development, very important. We know what that is, but emotional development is a different area than this. This is something that isn't, obviously is impacted by emotions, but isn't the same. And we also have an understanding of cognitive function, but we don't have a model of psychophysical functioning in the developing child, which we usually dismiss as posture. And I think our dismissal of this problem as posture is as archaic as the dismissal of the reality of emotional development 100 years ago in education, before Freud and other people came along to say, hey, this is not just some kid screwing up in school. This is an important aspect of child development. So here are the areas of child development, just a few of them. I describe this in more detail in the book. Motor system, behavior, attention, all of them sort of making up a concept of psychophysical functioning in the developing child. Okay, the second area that I just want to touch on, health. So health, again, in the Western world, we have probably more developed models in the East than we have in the West. In the Western world, our concept of health is pretty impoverished. If you don't have the markers of ill health, you're deemed to be healthy. But health is a much more complex process than that. And in fact, health possesses objective characteristics. I think we're so archaic in our understanding of this particular subject that we don't even think that there's anything objective to know. This is the body is a black box. I mean, I hope if I stay fit and eat well, that the black box is going to function well, and if it doesn't, I'm going to go to the doctor. But it's not a black box. It's a very sophisticated mechanism, the workings of which we have not fully understood. And a couple of examples of this are, well, one of them was the problem that I was suffering from, which is back trouble. Another is working of the arm. A lot of people have shoulder problems or arm problems, musicians, writing, typing. Well, these problems are not simply the presence of symptoms that have to be treated. We have to understand the functional systems that make up health in the adult, not just the child. So I just want to give you just a little brief overview of some of those systems. Here's the shoulder girdle. This is just the clavicle and scapula. But if you look in the next slide, gives you an idea of how complex it gets, because we could see it provides sockets for the upper limb. And that's a very complex system that we need to understand much more about. That's another thing that I study. That's only one functional system, the shoulder girdle and upper limb. Another functional system is breathing. we're much more we're much more interested in doing exercises for breathing than we are in understanding how it works. But the breathing is a very sophisticated system, and again, we pretty much ignore it from birth till death, except when we practice a few exercises. But the breathing system, shown here just with movements of the diaphragm, the ribs, is a very sophisticated system, and how it works is a matter of psychophysical health. Do we have any more on that, Serena? Any more on the systems? That's it? No. Another area that I want to mention relating to health is stress. We have models for addressing stress. But again, they're mostly negative. We have symptoms of stress, and in the Western world, we have a pretty sophisticated understanding of stress mechanisms and how they operate. We don't have a very sophisticated understanding of how consciousness can be used to understand it, except insofar as we could bring in consciousness as a way of sort of eliciting temporarily relaxed state. When we do that, we then say, well, I can document that that works. In fact, I could document it with pretty sophisticated data, and we call that science. That's not science. That's just data. The work that's been done to understand the stress mechanism, that's science. That's incredible. That's amazing. But just showing that a particular method gives you a little bit of reduction in stress isn't even beginning to approach the problem, because the problem happens in action as a matter of unconscious behavior. To understand stress, we have to not simply attack it by using relaxation methods to lower it. We have to understand the working of that system and in what way the working of that system corresponds to a balanced state of stress. When we do that, then we're no longer just simply lowering stress, we're understanding the roots of it. And at an even more profound level, we can begin to understand stress as a problem we can actually rise above with conscious development. And again, it's very rare to find adults in our modern day sedentary, busy, information age culture who are able even to walk without stress, let alone go through a whole day without it. But we should be able to walk without stress, go through a whole day without stress. And again, in the model I'm presenting, I'm looking at how that can be done as a matter of educational growth. One more thing I want to say about this is when we look at problems like stress, we tend to understand, this is the same is true with child development, we tend to look at the subject of child development when we speak about, let's say, the kid's posture or motor function. We tend to, in the development of a field, we often go from the fringes or the clinical abnormal toward the normal. It's easier to see what's clinically abnormal than the normal. It's a little like gravity. I mean, it took a long time for someone to even realize gravity was even there. And when someone realized it, you discover a ubiquitous principle in the universe. We have concepts of abnormal development in children, but we don't have a very developed concept of normal development in children. And the same applies to health. We have pretty good concepts of abnormal development, but we don't have a concept of normal development. Normal development is not very sexy. I mean, when you have a child that's sitting there and has bad posture, you say, that's just not very interesting to me. I'd rather look at the kids who have something wrong with the motor system. When we learn what's wrong with the motor system, it may even sound impressive. But what's really impressive is how this developed functionally to do what it does in a child or adult. And we really don't know a lot about it because we haven't studied it as a normal function. And the same applies to mindfulness. To understand the psychology attaching to everyday life, that's a really beautiful, subtle, and deep problem. And we've barely even begun to scratch the surface. Again, some of the Eastern models are more sophisticated than the Western models in appreciating the subtleties of human consciousness. So I want to just conclude just with just read a couple of passages from the book, and then we can have questions and answers if you have any questions. Sort of toward the conclusion, I have a couple of things I wanted to share. So in a very general sense, the separation between mind and body is reflected in the two approaches that I've looked at in these talks and I've mentioned here, represented by the East and West. The Western view is material, academic, and largely irrelevant to everyday experience. The Eastern view is spiritual, aloof, and removed from everyday life and socially meaningful activity. But material function and psychological insight are rooted in the same functions, part of the same organism designed for action and for meaningful construction of experience. Understood properly, the bodily and spiritual come together in a unified conception rooted in organic structures with a high level of complexity, like humans. Such a unified model points the way to a new kind of integration of mind and body, a unification of the material and spiritual, and education of body and spirit, comprising a truly relevant and vital pursuit of the science of man. The unification of philosophy and science in the study of our higher order design will also take place in the unification of theory and practice in an understanding of the true nature of mind and body as a vital study and practical discipline and not just a dead academic set of facts. The worst kind of separation can be found in many branches of research where the accumulation of empirical data and theories of higher learning have devolved into mental exercises separated from the arts of living and from any practical meaning and import. Such research masquerades as real knowledge, whereas what is needed is a true knowledge of material processes in action. Practical knowledge, in contrast, is seen as flaky, but only because we have a limited and intellectually bigoted view of what is intellectually legitimate, as if practical self-study is less valid than a narrow and useless empiricism. The result is a type of academic scholarship that lacks a real sense of purpose and that is unable to frame meaningful problems, amassing endless information with little practical import. Practical knowledge is not less scientific, but science on a different scale. And proceeding without this knowledge is to proceed blindly and in ignorance of what is really needed. To fully recognize the emergence of intelligence in humans, a true neuroscience of the organism in humans must describe not only a complex system, but one capable of transforming itself into a highly self-ordering system, and one in which the transformation is understood as part of its very nature. An understanding of this kind of development must become one of the central aims of education, recognizing a higher plane of development based on an enriched understanding of our nature and on what it means to be human. This cannot be achieved based on prescriptive principles or teaching or values that are glommed onto behavior, but on the scientific, rational, and experiential understanding of our higher order design and faculties. Only education based on a broad outlook that can unify a materialistic science and subjectively based knowledge can bridge theory and practice by bringing both together as meaningful processes grounded based upon a grounded and practical science of man. Both views, East and West, come together in an understanding of our higher conscious potential, grounded in a broad and experientially rooted understanding of our evolution and design, and pointing to a higher form of conscious development and understanding. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to still be here for questions and answers. And in particular, where's Jennifer? Jennifer Govan is the senior librarian here at Gottsman. Thank you very much for organizing this and taking the time and for supporting my lunch hour talks. And I also want to thank Serena Wolf, a student of mine and also my assistant, for organizing this. And I also want to acknowledge my parents right over here. Some of you may doubt that they are my parents because they look so young. Thanks for coming. And I'm going to stay here for a few minutes. Serena is showing the book. We have copies. I would have charged a lot of money for these, but I'm not allowed to. So they're free, okay? But if you don't mind, we don't have a lot of copies. So if you're a couple, take one for the two of you. But please come grab one, okay? Thank you very much.